We have extremely high prices of our essentials. Milk is higher, is expensive. Petrol, LPG, cooking oil, unemployment numbers are high. Poverty is increasing. There is a severe lack of demand. And at the same time, just yesterday, our finance minister was quoted saying the economy has started to show indications of recovery. Do you agree that we are showing signs of a recovery?
When growth plummets so deep, you reach a point from where there is only one way to go. From 2016, every year's growth has been less than the previous year's growth. So well before the COVID came, the growth has been tumbling down. So even if there are green shoots, there are green shoots from the bottom of the pit.
Most of the aid that the government has given them is in form of more loans. Is it likely to head to lead to a further whiplash?
When the time comes, when the people are going to be repaying, what is the plan to smoothen that period out? I don't know if that's happening. And if that is not happening, then the economy does risk a whiplash, and the whiplash usually takes a financial form.
You talked about how the rise of divisive politics will actually change the mood in which people look at India, especially investors.
If you look at early India, the writings of Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, about inclusive society that you're trying to build, I feel there was a huge amount of respect that is eroding, and we must work in India to change things before the erosion becomes very deep.
Once in a while in my career, I get to have a conversation with someone whose work I admire deeply. Today is one of those days. Today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Kaushik Basu. Give me a minute for a quick introduction. Former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, former Chief Economist at the World Bank, current Professor of Economics and International Studies at Cornell University, the current and recent recipient of the Humboldt Research Award for Economics, and the author of a book called Policymakers Journal that has just been released. Dr. Basu has been kind enough to agree to talk to us. I must tell you that the Policymakers Journal is actually a print of his diary at the time when he held these very prestigious jobs in our government and in the World Bank. It is an interesting look at the life of a policymaker, and it's also surprisingly funny. It gives you sort of a window into Dr. Basu's sense of humor, which I found enjoyable. I'm sure you'll enjoy that, that book as well. Dr. Basu, thank you so much for speaking with us. My first question to you is about what you mentioned in the book, the life of someone in government and in policy. You talked about how you were working with the finance ministry at that time, which involved, of course, a lot of people coming together and having long conversations and making decisions that you were only then later in the day realized would impact millions and millions of lives. Do you believe, when you look at government now, that things have changed very drastically from how government functioned when you were around back then, and that was a UPA government, to what it is like today?
Faye, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I occasionally have watched your programs, so it's good to be here. So, I, of course, knew that time policymaking, the setup very well in great detail. I don't know as much now.
Yes.
So it is a bit difficult for me to compare, but the impression that you probably get from the book is that it was a space of some chaos because there were lots of opinions coming up, even at high-level decision-making. But it took me a little bit of time to develop an appreciation for that churn very often threw up ideas, and those ideas were put in place, and all that was very visible on the economy. India's economy was doing remarkably well. India's inflation was very high. Right from 2008, it was high, but it was coming down. And it was bringing down inflation is a slow process, but that was working out very well. And this, just for the lay audience, inflation was high, real growth was very high. So people's standard of living was improving. It was not being eroded by the inflation because it was way outstripping the real growth. All that has changed, and it makes me feel a little bit, without knowing actually what's happening, is that space which you do need in government, because it's such a complex machinery, the economy. You want lots of voices, dissenting voices, and through that churn, an idea to come up, and then you implement it.
Yes.
I get the impression that has gone down. And that is very, very damaging for an economy. There are a few exceptions. The world is full of historical examples where one or two with very strange policies have done well countries. But basically, countries that have done well in today's complex world, you need a lot of space for that discussion. And all I know about my time is that, yes, of course it was ordered. It's in government you're talking, there is a hierarchy, but there was a lot of space for dissenting opinion. My juniors would dissent to what I was saying. I would dissent to what the ministers were saying. In the end, of course, the decision is taken at the top and there is a process, but there was space for that. And my impression from the occasional conversation with people in government, top, very talented people, is that that space has got cramped.
You did say in your book, and I'm quoting, you said India's outstanding performance, which you referred to, growing each year above 9% between 2005 and 2008, owes a lot to Manmohan Singh's professionalism, which influences all those who work with him. You've talked about how you believed it's important, the way the Prime Minister conducts himself, what he talks about, what he prioritizes. And you gave Dr. Manmohan Singh credit for not ever being interested in sort of promoting himself and his electoral victories, but actually just focusing on the job at hand. Do you see that as different in this government?
Probably. And that is a bit unfortunate. And this for me is a bit of a discovery. So let me just explain. With this government, I have political differences, but that's democracy. I mean, for me, the secular principle for an inclusive India, for a democratic country, these were India's stunning achievements, absolutely stunning for an emerging economy. And this, in the United States, it was appreciated that in the entire globe of newly independent countries, India stood out. And I took pride in that. So there, the polarization of India was hurting me. But my expectation throughout was that the economy would do well, despite the change in government. That has come to me as a big, big surprise, that the economy is floundering the way it is doing. And I feel now, and this I had to do some soul searching, because initially I had expected, yes, I would have political disagreements, but this is a democracy. You have to tolerate whoever has won is in power, and that person makes decisions. But the economy caught me by surprise. And the surprise is that clearly there were policymaking mistakes taking place. And gradually I reached the conclusion that being there at a time when there was a lot of professionalism in government, you forget how much of the details of policy depends on that professionalism. If those things become really very quick orders by which you're trying to run a complex mechanism like India, you will make mistakes. And I feel that's the price that the Indian economy is paying now.
Dr. Basu, give us an example. Give me an example of what you mean by the professionalism that led to that efficiency.
See, I mean, again, I don't know actually what's happened behind the scenes. I'll give you one from the lockdown that happened in March 2020. When the lockdown happened, my first feeling was it's a bold, clear step taken. And I had expected the way it would have been done in my time. There would be a couple of days of 12-hour brainstorming with people that when you're bringing this in, what do you do immediately about that? The fact that shops will close, that workers will be caught in different places. Initially, I assumed that that had been done. So I felt that, okay, this is an announcement, but you will see backup. Within weeks, it became clear that that had not been done. That in fact, the Indian economy was being brought to a grinding halt in a way. India that quarter grew at minus 23%, which is among the slowest 10 growing countries in the world. That happened then made me feel that this kind of brainstorming which you need for a detailed policy probably had not taken place. So that then gave me insights into what happened in the past, like the demonetization. Had it been thought through? And I now feel, no, it had not been thought through enough when it was done.
But I do have to ask you this, as someone who's been in government, do our systems allow for unilateral decisions of this capacity or this size, this impact to be made? Or are there checks and balances within government to make sure that a decision of this size that can be this painful to so many people can't be made unilaterally?
Well, a lot does depend on, after all, with the checks and balances, a final decision is still taken. So it does depend on the wisdom of that final decision, whether you're pausing to take in the criticism, where you're allowing people to voice dissenting opinion. And that, again, I don't know. And I do know from my time that on many very important things, I've talked at length about corruption control, where actually there were big problems, but the problems were being acknowledged. So no rushed move made which would bring the economy to a halt, trying to control corruption simply because of that. So the checks and balances are there, but as you do know, in an emerging economy like India, unlike in an advanced economy, the checks and balances can also be trodden over. So a lot does depend on the wisdom of recognizing and respecting the checks and balances, which you can actually ride over. It's possible for you to do so.
Dr. Basu, in October last year, you gave an interview where you said you were worried about where the Indian economy was at that time. Now, that is before the terrible second wave hit us. It hit us emotionally, physically, health-wise. Many people who otherwise watched the economy didn't even have the time to track the economy during the second wave because it was that terrible. But we're now looking at it. We have terribly low growth. We have extremely high prices of our essentials, which we call inflation, but most of it hasn't reflected in the inflation numbers yet. Milk is higher, is expensive. Petrol, LPG, cooking oil, unemployment numbers are high. Poverty is increasing. There is a severe lack of demand. And at the same time, just yesterday, our finance minister was quoted saying the economy has started to show indications of recovery from the burden of the second wave of the COVID pandemic, owing to planned fiscal relief, monetary policy, and speedy vaccination campaign. Do you agree that we are showing signs of a recovery?
A lot of it depends, of course, on by what measure you're looking at it. One thing you have to be clear, that when growth plummets so deep, as happened in India, you reach a point from where there is only one way to go. Growth, because you are getting out of it, so the growth shows positive. Like, for instance, lots of people are saying that if next year the Indian economy grows at 10%, if it grows 10% next year, the coming financial year, given that the previous year it's gone roughly minus 8%, yes, that means over a 2-year period, actually it is 2%, which means 1% per annum. So if you look at from the bottom of the pit, the growth figures, everything looks as if the country is doing well. But if you look at from the pre-pit level, then it's not. So this is the thing to be kept in mind. I feel growth will be positive. It's plummeted to a point where it has going to be picking up from there. The other thing that I have actually pointed out several times is that India does have fundamental strengths. By fundamental strengths, I mean an entrepreneurial class with a lot of capacity for innovation. 2 sectors where we have huge strengths, the pharmaceutical sector. We've handled it very badly. I mean, India's vaccine policy has been handled very badly for a country that is such a big vaccine producer. But we are a massive vaccine producer. We are very good in pharmaceuticals. We are very good in information technology. So India has all these strengths. But we have done badly, not just during this COVID year, but from 2016. Every year's growth has been less than the previous year's growth. So well before the COVID came, the growth has been tumbling down. So even if there are green shoots from the bottom of the pit. We'll have to wait and watch. I'm not completely sure what's going to happen. The short run will be difficult. The medium term, we can talk about it later if you're interested. Yeah.
Right. So effectively putting this up on the screen for our viewers, 2021 ended at minus 7.3. But if you consider where we were in 2016-17, we were at 8%. It came down to 6.5 to 3.9, and then minus 7.3. So when we say 10%, you must realize it's 10% of the previous year, not 10% equally, which is 2% more than the 8% we saw back in 2016. So that's really what the ground we have to cover when we recover. And it's also important to note that when we look at the numbers here, a lot of the drops started, or some of the drops started pre-COVID. So while there is this, the truth is that, yes, we've been hit by a pandemic. Dr. Basu, do you see it as responsible for everything that we're seeing right now, or
no? If it was just the COVID which is causing our growth to do poorly, that wouldn't worry me. First, but I should also emphasize that India has handled the lockdown and the economy worse than most other countries. So we have done worse than other countries with the COVID. But you can always say it's a novel situation. Yes, there were other countries like Indonesia very early, 2020, put together a committee, the president put together a committee of health management and economy management together. So they were doing their lockdowns very curated, keeping an eye on the economy. So that was a sophisticated intervention. You've seen very good interventions in Vietnam and other countries, which is watching the health, watching the economy. We have not done that. So we have COVID and the economy during the COVID, we've handled worse than most other countries, but I would still pardon that. It's a totally novel situation. Some countries have been very smart and have done well. I would have expected India to be there because India's usually quite sophisticated, but well, it's a novel situation. What worries me, and when I said that the economy has begun to worry me, is not the COVID year. It's the previous three, 4 years that the growth is doing so very poorly. And from a country which was really in, say, the middle of the first decade, say 2005 to 2008, in fact, it dips for 1 year and picks up again. 2005 to 2012, India's really just right in the front lines of the world. From there, we've been coming down over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's what worries me about what happened previous to the COVID, even if I leave out this year.
You have said, and you talked about what the government needs to do in terms of intervention. You tweeted, you said, we mustn't live in denial. We are in stagflation. All government expenditure should be directed to help small businesses and the poor. Now, the government has now so far over the last 2 years announced 2 massive packages of stimulus. Do you believe those stimulus packages address the problem at hand?
The stimulus is welcome, so it's broadly the right kind of thing to do, but it has to be even bigger and it has to be more curated. And let me just explain this, Faye. You know, when you get a general recession, the Great Depression or the Great Recession of 2008, overall demand goes slack in the economy.
Yes.
Put in buying power, just throw cash into the system, the economy will begin to pick up a little bit. That's the old wisdom from Keynes. But the COVID creates a very different situation. Some sectors are completely strangled. Hospitality, hotels, travel, tourism, completely strangled. Other sectors have a shortage. Hospitals, medical supplies, there's greater demand. So you need a much more curated intervention, fiscal intervention, holding back demand in some sectors, injecting liquidity into other sectors. Not enough of that is happening. And this is, again, what I was referring to earlier. For this, you need a lot of skilled technical expertise that put money in the hands of these people, don't put money in the hands of these people, etc. I'm not seeing enough of that. And that I don't blame politicians because, well, blame politicians in the sense that they should get the expertise to do it. They will not have the answer for that, but they need to pull in the expertise to do it. Not enough of that is happening.
Because you had mentioned in the past that you believed that the migrant crisis that arose out of the first lockdown could have easily been predicted and planned for.
Yeah, that was actually completely shocking. I did a program with Ella Bhatt on that. It was really shocking and heartrending to see people. Now the estimates are from 23 million to some 40 million people walking across India. Not to be able to predict that with India's level of sophistication that is there, whether you're using it is another matter, was a shocking lapse. And that's what I meant, that for the whole world, this has affected India's image, that India did a lockdown without planning for this major fallout, which first of all undid a lot of the benefits of the lockdown. Because at one level, 95% of your population is locked down and 5% of your population is unlocked in a way that would not happen in normal times. They are scattered all over the country. So the germs were being spread. The virus was being spread by this. No fault of the migrants. They are caught in the middle of this. They couldn't do anything. That it was an instance which did hurt India's image. And I think investment, everything, once you get these signals, it begins to affect the mood in the country and the mood on the Indian economy, whether it's from global observers, global businesses, or within India. It's very, very down right now.
Also, our audience should know the government keeps using a particular statistic which they like to use on FII. You're saying investment has come into India, but this is investment that comes into the Indian stock market. which is really not investment that's here to stay. It's not going to be building roads or hospitals for us. It's just going to be making quick money out of our stock market. But I do want to ask you this, and this is something that I know has confused a lot of people in the country. In the last year and a half of lockdown and pandemic, the billionaires of our country have had their wealth grow by over 30%. Billionaires across the world have become richer, but ours have become more rich than their global counterparts. The poor of our country have gotten much, much poorer. Is this a symptom of the pandemic, or are we doing something terribly wrong in this country that is making our rich richer in a time of crisis?
There is a bit of a natural propensity for that to happen during a pandemic like this, as we are now discovering, because, as you rightly pointed out, this is a bit of a global phenomenon. The super rich are somehow, and this is what I meant, that a pandemic, unlike in the general recession, hits different parts of the economy very differently. Super rich everywhere are tending to do better. What makes it actually unfortunate for India is that even in America, a capitalist country, there's a lot of awareness that the poor are being hit very badly. And if you look at the way money is being doled out into the hands of the poor, more can be done, but a lot is being done. People who are losing jobs, immediately getting some support to keep them going. And it is beginning to pick up. So the wealthy have done well. In India, what has happened is the super rich have done very well. I think it's unfortunate because you do want greater equality in a country, but you know that there will be a bit of a natural tendency during this kind of a turmoil, it happens. But there is nowhere nearly as much intervention taking place to support the poor. And this is among the general critique of the economy, is that the poor are suffering in a bigger way. You know, things like this kind of suffering usually does get discovered in retrospect when there's a big suffering, but the signs, bodies being tossed into the river. For a Hindu, when a person is dying, it's the ultimate insult when you have to do that. But if the wood is expensive, if you can't spend that little bit of money, you have no option. And I feel in the end, when you add all this up, it'll be clear that the poorest segments of our population are going through a level of suffering which is just unimaginable, and there is not enough being directed at them. The fact that the rich are doing well, it's a bit of a natural tendency, but the government has to counter it by reaching out to the poor.
You did, of course, also mention a post-pandemic whiplash. You said that, and this seems to be sinking in, that this is not something that we're not going to open the economy tomorrow after the virus is gone. We're not going to go back to normal. This is going to last for a very, very long time. Would you explain to us what you mean by a post-pandemic whiplash?
Yeah, there is a bit of a risk that the economy is going to get another shock, which is the sort of build-up of all the problems that is arising during the pandemic is a possibility. And we were just now talking about growth not being enough because you have to pick up to the pre-pandemic level. And globally, there are very few countries, actually in Asia, I think it's China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, which have gone past their pre-pandemic level. Otherwise, everyone is down. So it is it's a difficult situation. But if we are not very careful with the economy, you can get a whiplash after this with a couple of economies taking off, moving further forward, but the others really suffering in a very, very big way. Like, for instance, for the poor. We do know, not just for the poor, for the middle classes, lower middle classes, there is a debt buildup that is taking place. People are borrowing more money than they've done in the past, which used to historically happen during very bad times. A famine comes, people build up their debt. When a debt is building up, you don't realize how severe the problem is because people are still buying what they need by borrowing money. When the time comes to pay back, either those who have lent money will discover that there's nothing for them to get back, or those who have taken the money, they'll discover that it's just impossible for them to pay it back. Yes. That's when you begin to get a financial crisis coming. And when a financial crisis comes, a mismatch between how well off people thought they were because they had borrowed money, and those who had lent money thought my money is sitting there and I'm going to get back. When you suddenly realize that there isn't as much as we thought, when you put together everyone's belief about what wealth they have, the economy gets a shock. There's much less than what you thought there is. And that is going to be another kind of a crisis. I'm not sure that will happen. And it is possible to avert that. There's, again, enough expertise. You have to intervene very intelligently to soften that up. But in that article, I was giving a bit of a warning that economies can get a whiplash bigger than what you're seeing in the middle of a crisis, because people are borrowing and making do over the current situation.
We've also read, Dr. Basu, that small enterprises run by entrepreneurs in our country have really suffered in the last year and a half. And most of the aid that the government has given them is in form of more loans. See, here is a guaranteed loan that you can borrow from such and such banks. Now, banks are reluctant to hand out the loans because they're worried the money will never come back. But if this is the kind of aid the government is going to hand out, which is here is another loan, here is another loan, is it likely to lead to a further whiplash? Because how will I ever recover that money and pay you back if demand doesn't come back for the product I'm making in my factory?
Yeah, right. So there is that is the risk, and there is State Bank of India has put out data showing the debt buildup that is taking place, and this is not big businesses borrowing. This is ordinary people borrowing and small businesses being forced to borrow, and that is indeed the kind of risk that if you just give them another loan, you're postponing the immediate problem, people are buying, but the risk of the whiplash increases as you're doing that. Now, I don't have enough information on detailed data. My own expectation would have been when I was in government, there would be very detailed calculations going on. That when the time comes, when the people are going to be repaying, what is the plan to smoothen that period out? I don't know if that's happening. And if that is not happening, then the economy does risk a whiplash, and the whiplash usually takes a financial form. It's the currency, it's the borrowing and paying back, and then it affects the real economy. That's the risk, but it is a risk, and I hope the government will be attentive to that.
You have in your book referred to the time you were in government in June 2010. This was the time that you in government presided over the deregulation of petrol prices. For our audience who are too young to remember, petrol prices were controlled by the government. So we were actually importing crude at a higher price. The government was absorbing that, the difference and selling it to the Indian customer at a far lower price, which was considered unhealthy in the long term. That's where Dr. Basu came in, and he and his colleagues decided to lift that regulation and have the domestic price and the global price actually run in tandem and actually reflect each other. Today, Dr. Basu, we are paying 100 rupees at least for petrol in most of our big cities. 56 rupees out of that is purely tax, center and state. Is this what you had expected when you were deregulating petrol?
No, not at all. And let me explain a little bit, Faye. The whole idea was that even then it was unpopular when we did it, but I was in favor of the deregulation for the following reason, that occasionally global prices rise very high. If you keep India's price controlled, then India's over-consume this product where there is a global shortage. Whereas if you allow the price to rise when global prices have risen, you will affect economy and you will spend less on fuel, petrol, and that's what you wanted. And when the global prices drop, again, let it go down and let people buy. But the idea was for it to move in tandem with the global prices, and keeping in mind that if there is a very sharp global rise, the government may have to step in and say that we will not allow price to go that high because the government is going to take that shock. Again, I don't know the detailed figures. It is catching me by surprise that at a time when prices are rising, India's inflation, by the way, wholesale price inflation is now at a 30-year high. I mean, we haven't seen this 30 years ago, and that can cascade into the retail sector. Then the buyers are going to be affected. So worth remembering that WPI inflation is now at a 30-year high. At this point of time, I would have expected not that kind of a margin between global price and what the Indian consumers are paying. Bring the margin down massively so that it's softened and this price does not cascade into the others. But I can't give you any detailed comments because I need to see the calculations of what's going on for this. But it is catching me by surprise. The price rise in India, I don't think that is called for or needed.
Well, the justifications we've received from ministers, specifically Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, who was Petroleum Minister until a few days ago, he had at one point said the government is using this money for its vaccine program. It's using the money for all of the various COVID schemes that they're launching. 2 weeks before that, he made a statement saying the government is paying back oil bonds that the Congress government had actually borrowed and left as a large loan that needed to be paid back. And this is why we can't bring the prices down. Does that sound to you, does that add up to you?
No, that does not make any sense really. That no matter what you owe to the world or anyone from earlier, to cause inflation in your country in a vital product, to pay that back is not the right way to do it. There are many other ways, and the government expenditures there all over the place. You can pull that down. Vaccines, you can cut deals with vaccine producers. India has its own vaccine producers about paying them in the long run. There's a lot of sophisticated deals that could have been cut. And vaccines, frankly, if this was done in advance, the vaccine purchase, the right amount, India would not be in this situation about the COVID, because ultimately the way to keep the economy going and COVID under control is vaccination. And India being among the world's 4 biggest vaccine producers, should not India's vaccination rate, fully vaccinated population, India is about the 100th in the world. So some 99 countries are ahead of India with higher vaccination. That should not have happened. And you don't allow prices on a vital product to rise as a justification for buying vaccines. There's no justification really for that. There are other ways of doing that.
And Dr. Basu, the government, the finance minister had allocated a large amount of money to vaccines in the budget in February. So again, explain to us then, if the money has already been allocated in a, in the annual budget, is it necessary for the government to come up with new ways to raise those funds through the course of the year? Shouldn't they have already, effectively budgeted for it if it's in the budget?
Absolutely, it should be there. If it is not there, think of cutting other expenditures in government. There are many other expenditures going on which you can cut. And the last resort, I don't want to encourage that, but for the government to borrow and build up a debt which the government is going to offload slowly over time is a better option than raising the price of a fundamental product that cascades and affects ordinary people. Is not the right thing to do.
So again, one could argue that the pandemic hit us the first time, then again the second time, and it may be government has argued that the size of the second wave and the impact of the second wave and the demand it put on the healthcare sector could have never actually been budgeted for. We could have never assumed it. If we take that at face value and we examine the vaccine policy, we know how many citizens we have in our country. We know how many are adults. We know how many doses we need to administer. We knew how much those doses would cost and how long they would take to manufacture. Do you believe we have done justice to our vaccine policy, given the prowess of the minds in government, which you have talked about in your book, the brilliant minds that are part of our government system? Did we do justice, or would you say?
Nowhere near. Yeah, nowhere near. The vaccine, this is the part of the COVID, the second wave, would not have been as big a wave as happened if we had moved faster on the vaccination policy. But we did not. And there again, it's not just the expertise. Expertise, I don't know how much is being used, but we have the capacity to produce. These were a question of early deals being cut on the vaccines being made available. And another thing you must remember, where India stands out, and for many decades, is our infrastructure for vaccinating the population is remarkable for an emerging economy. India has had very successful vaccination policies, from polio to smallpox, globally appreciated. Given that infrastructure, given that we are producers of the vaccine, we should not have been caught in a situation where we have now about 100 countries ahead of India in terms of fully vaccinated population. And we must remember what is now becoming clear, that for the Delta variant, a single shot is not as much of a protection as for the earlier variants. So you need to be fully vaccinated, and India's trailing. The trailing would have been fine if we were not a vaccine producer. But given that we are a vaccine producer, we shouldn't have been in this situation where we are now.
One theoretical question, if I may ask you about economics. There's the whole idea of sort of left-inclined economics and right-wing economics. And right now, if we look at Twitter and the kind of comments that are made, there's a certain amount of disdain towards developmental socialism, or what they call freebies that the government is going to hand out. We shouldn't be doing it. It's not good for the economy. We should actually just be helping people become self-employed or Atmanirbhar. Do you believe, especially where we are right now in India, that there is a strong case for socialism or developmental socialism or a theory of economics, whatever one may call it, where we look at the poor first and the rich last, as opposed to the other way around?
Yeah, I would love a 1-hour discussion with you on this. The topic very close to my heart. You know, when I was at the World Bank, I introduced World Bank has 2 mission goals sort of organized around that. One used to be there from the time of McNamara, which is poverty, that there shouldn't be so much global poverty. One which was introduced, and I led that effort, was that inequality is also something that we have to pay attention to. And we put in a criterion where the World Bank now churns out data regularly, that you evaluate a society in terms of how the poorest section of the society is doing. So actually, World Bank puts out data on all countries, the bottom 40%, you ignore the top. And this is a very Gandhian kind of thing, that if judge a society by how the bottom end is doing. And I feel, yes, you must do that. There, the ideological disagreement that occurs, and really, I think Indians ought to understand this better, and there's confusion all over. My own sympathy, to put this on the table, is with the left in terms of the objectives. You do want a society where your objective is the bottom segment of the population. You want them to do well, and all your focus should be there. I also have disagreements with the left. I feel the left is often very not realistic about what you can do to help the poorest. You can go in for lots of government interventions, which will be such bumbling interventions that you will actually end up hurting everyone in the long run. And we have seen this former communist countries. What has happened in the current debate is there are almost just 2, people assume that there are just 2 schools of thought, communism and ultimate free market capitalism. And people brand you as belonging here or there. Yeah, but reality is really neither of those. I mean, you have to be, I like the thought that people ought to be focused on the poor, the rich can look after themselves. And then you use intelligent policy to reach the poor. And intelligent policy means you have to create space for the private sector to function. The government can't take over everything. The private sector needs the right kind of incentives to do. And private sector, I don't mean 5 big corporations that will capture the economy and crush the economy in the long run with 5 big corporations. Private sector means competitive private sector with a lot of them playing. That's the kind of system that we have to go towards, helping the poor. And as for helping the poor, this I feel even in a vibrant market economy like United States, it's now increasingly being recognized, and Scandinavian countries have recognized it a long time ago. Given the way the world is going, the demand for labor is dropping and machines are gradually taking over. What do? Do you just look the other way and say people find jobs, or if you don't find jobs, you perish? Or you think of really deep interventions in the economy to divert some of the wealth from the rich to the poor? I feel all over the West, there is now a body of thought that you will have to go for these interventions, because in the end, if there is no work, if everything is being done by computers and robots, do you just allow people to perish and tell them if you find a job, it's fine? No, you have to do something about them. And one of them is profit sharing. So there's a lot going on this. And I really wish, for the sake of India, that people read a little bit about this, think a little bit about this, and not just immediately for political reasons take a position here or there.
I know that you are fairly active on Twitter as well. Do you believe that, unfortunately, because of social media, a lot of the nuance in public opinion has worn out, where you're not allowed to actually have a nuanced opinion about anything? You're sort of pigeonholed. You're either this or that. You're either pro or against. You're either right or left, where a lot of us are neither of those 2 things.
Yeah, I'm sure that is happening. I also don't fully understand, but the polarization is so deep, even in the United States, you see that it's got, and it is something to do with social media, where you're putting out a sentence. And earlier, when I uttered a sentence, every sentence has an immediate direct meaning and also lots of nuances. When I'm talking in a small group, I know it's a shared sense of the world, and my sentence will be interpreted in a particular way. Whereas when I'm tossing it out on Twitter, people are reading who are reading it completely differently with a different mindset. And this is causing something. I don't know what it is, but it's a way of the world today. And we will have to grapple and handle this, but yeah.
Dr. Basu, you live in the United States right now. You worked with the World Bank. And I remember in a previous interview, you talked about how the rise of divisive politics will actually change the mood in which people look at India, especially investors. Have you noticed, from where you're looking at it from the outside in, that there is a change in the way global investors are looking at India, are assessing India? Is there a difference at all? What is that difference?
I do think so. India was a very respected country. And I'm wondering if it's there in my diary, but I have written about it. In early days, when I used to teach at the Delhi School of Economics, going to international conferences, this was in the early 80s, you go to an international conference where the main participants are all from Europe and United States and a small group for India. And then there would be lots from other developing countries. The Indians were really treated as par as people from the advanced economies. Some of the best minds coming in, and it was also a respect for India, that there is no other developing country that is a democracy, that is a secular country, which is open to all kinds of diversity. It is true India's growth record was bad for a long time, but we know that from the early 1990s, even the growth picked up to absolutely the top of the world. So India was a very respected country. Read someone like Martin Wolf in Financial Times 2005. Just glowing report about India. This combination that is coming, that polity and society is like an advanced economy. And an economy which is now growing at a rate which is faster than anyone else, was remarkable. And I used to feel good about it as an Indian, that there is this great appreciation for India. No, that has been going down very steadily. The feeling is that India is just joining the countries that we've seen that divisive, and the economy is no longer doing the way the economy was doing. And the two facets of India, that an open society with all its difficulties, and there were, of course, discriminations. United States has lots of discrimination. But if you look at the early statements from Abe Lincoln to others, it's trying to build a country which is inclusive. India, if you look at early India, the writings of Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, about inclusive society that you're trying to build. I feel there was a huge amount of respect that is eroding, and we must work in India to change things before the erosion becomes very deep.
My last question to you, and I know I'm overshooting my allotted time, is again, the portion of time where you were in government is also the portion that was then remembered for crony capitalism, for extreme corruption, which you referred to, and for what was known as policy paralysis. Everybody just felt that this thing is not moving. We were at 8.5%. Everybody felt we could get to double-digit growth if we got a government that was not paralyzed. And that's when the 2014 elections happened. Retrospectively now, do you agree that those were serious problems, that there weren't enough decisions being made? And are we better off having a government that's willing to make decisions much faster?
No, it's a mixed bag. Let me first take down the crony capitalism, and I'm going to move that aside. Cronyism, there is always a tendency in developing countries, and India had that. There would be 100 corporations, 200 corporations, firms that would have some greater access than others. So there was that tendency. And I think in my diary, I have mentioned that there was one conversation with the Prime Minister at that time, saying that, Dr. Manmohan Singh telling me that we have to always be on alert about crony capitalism. And I remember feeling just very good, this awareness that we have to make sure that there isn't special access. That was there. So crony capitalism tendency that was there, which was there in all capitalist market economies, India had that. I don't think it was particularly bad. Crony capitalism has gone much worse now. Corruption was bad. Corruption is bad. But let me explain this a little bit. The corruption, and I spent quite a bit of time in my diary talking about corruption because that was hitting it. It was bad. Corruption was there quite a lot. But I was working with people, a whole bunch of them, who are very serious about controlling corruption, but very, very smart, knowing that trying to control corruption, you can end up crushing the economy and not control corruption. History is replete with examples of trying to control corruption, do something very damaging, you don't control corruption, and you damage the economy. And we have to realize that corruption is interwoven with the real, honestly functioning society. So if you take a ham-handed approach to corruption, you're going to crush the economy. Like I remember there was this actual conversation about Indians parking illegal money abroad. Lots of Indians do that, parking illegal money abroad. I find that objectionable. But there was one suggestion came that why don't we check on every Indian's account internationally and keep track? My view was you're going to slow down just ordinary business, that honest Indians who are actually trading and doing business, if you begin to stop everyone keeping track of everything, you will stop their business to catch those people who are illegally parking money. So there's a lot of careful, and Manmohan Singh, with whom I worked, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was very aware of this. For him, corruption was just dreadful. I mean, you have to remove it, but you have to do it carefully. But the corruption problem was there and the criticism was right. And what was your last thing? You were saying about decision-making paralysis. No, I think that was being overdone completely. And these things become a bit of a chorus when there were things on which we were being very slow. Pranab Mukherjee, who has a fantastic memory, when I met him last days of his life, I met him as he had just, his term as president was over. He reminded me that we had had 23 meetings about GST, trying to get GST in. So there were important decisions on which, yes, we were moving slowly, but those you have to move slowly. On the main things, India was actually taking decisions and the economy was doing very, very well. India's economy was growing at a fantastic rate. But a lot of publicity was coming on matters, which is right. The media should criticize, put pressure that the GST, we were not being able to take that last step. But again, you know, there were people I was working with who are stickler for being correct about these things, that you have to involve the states, you have to take their opinions. You may not like a particular chief minister, but that chief minister's opinion is still important. I respect that, and I feel on the whole, there were a couple of important decisions were held back, but just as well, you don't want to bulldoze over your structure of institutions to take those decisions. But India was the proof of the success was really in your testing of the pudding, and India's economy was doing very well. So it was a mixed bag of things, but right now, my worry is that the main thing, the economy is doing badly, and that is very, very visible. It has become.
Dr. Basu, I've run out of time. I do wish we could have a whole hour to discuss developmental economics and all of the various theories. I'd love for our younger audience to understand the nuances of those discussions as well. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, of course. Congratulations on the new book. Our audience, you can find it. It's released. It's very interesting. And it's a very pleasant read. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have questions for Dr. Basu, leave them in the comment section and we'll try to convince him to speak to us again.